Second part we're going to talk about is the business of cybersecurity and what impacts does it have on business. And to do that, I'm joined by Paul C. Dwyer, who's the CEO of Cyber Risk International. Paul, good afternoon. I'm also joined on the panel, or Paul is joined on the panel by Diane Reynolds, who's a partner at McElroy, Deutsch, Mulvaney and Carpenter, LLP in the US. Rob Leslie, who's the founder and CEO of Sedicii, and Jacky, who's Managing Director of Accenture Security in Ireland. So Paul, good afternoon. I appreciate your time and joining us, and I'll hand it over to you and let's discuss the business of cybersecurity.
Good afternoon, Connor, and good afternoon, everybody. And may I say, Connor, you're doing a fantastic job. This is really a top quality event. I'm really enjoying listening into all the speakers. It's been fantastic so far, and I'm looking forward to moderating this session. So an extended thank you to Dublin BIC, Boston College, and of course, the United States Embassy. So if I start off and just kick straight in, and maybe I'll start off with Jacky, if that's okay. And Jacky, let's talk a little bit about the challenges businesses have in relation to making sure they have the appropriate cyber strategy in place, because we've heard already about so many different things that can be done, so many different pieces of technology, and we exist in challenging times when people are trying to do digital transformation. They're trying to do the most with the resources they have, people and financial. What's your key advice in relation to how to make sure you have the appropriate cyber strategy for your business strategy?
I think it's really important that you have both the business and your cybersecurity and your technology professionals all speaking together. You can't have this operating in a silo. It's very much, the voice of all, and being able to speak a common language between both groups, the business and the technologists in there, to identify like what are the key assets. And your key assets aren't IT systems; they're more processes that you're running that keep your business alive. And what is it that we would really miss if it wasn't working in the morning? What would be really valuable if somebody else got hold of it? So I think it's identifying the key risks and threats to your business, and then putting appropriate controls in place to deal with that, be it process, be it technology, be it kind of putting people into roles to think about this.
Thanks, Jacky. And if I can just add a follow-on there. So we're obviously in these unique times when things are changing quite quickly for a lot of organizations. They have to adapt with their technology and so on. Could you elaborate maybe on how they can best do that in the times of the challenges we have working from home, remotely, the extended threat landscape, different inherent cyber risk, and maybe, different milestones and working, under fire, so to speak, and trying to do that. What are your sort of key pieces of advice on how they can understand if they're doing it properly?
Well, I think, a lot of businesses faced huge challenge recently, having to go into the working from home environment, and it brought a whole load of new threats in there, whether it's people not working around other people, whether it's that they were rushing and putting new technologies in place. And it was really important that people had a look back there. But, put that to one side and just say that regardless of what happened there, a lot of businesses are going through some kind of digital transformation speed at the moment. And it's really important that they're putting that security lens early in the project and not just kind of going and testing things at the end and saying, let's do a penetration test last day and see whether or not it's working, and then go, oops, sorry, there's a fundamental design problem we had in here that we should have looked at in the beginning. So I think it's making sure that as businesses either move to the cloud or transform in any way digitally, or put in, kind of new technologies, that they are actually doing and thinking about security from the very beginning, and shifting left in that cycle to make sure that they're doing it safely. It's definitely less expensive for an organization to design things and architect things right and engineer things right in the first place, rather than having to follow up and put sticking plasters on everything afterwards. It's a difficult decision for businesses, because security cost is often thought of as being an overhead, as opposed to an investment, or, looking at it as part of their innovation. And I think people need to change their mindset a little bit on that, because if you rush to market with something and it's not secure, you can be guaranteed that it'll either fall down at some stage, or somebody will break into it easily if it's easy to get into, and it won't look good for you in the long term.
Fantastic, great advice there, Jacky. And Diane, if I can turn to you, and it's very nice to virtually meet you. I know we haven't spoken before, but if I could talk to you about, arguably the NIST cybersecurity framework is one of the greatest cyber gifts that the United States has shared with the world. Can we talk a little bit about frameworks, risk management, the legal side, and your advice on how people can make sure that they're operating legally in relation to the cybersecurity controls they have from a global perspective?
I think that you need to have, as Jacky mentioned early, I mean, it's a triumvirate of business, tech, and legal. And our experience has been that it is crucial to have this interdisciplinary activity. And we work with a team. So we have tech guys that work with us on a global basis. And the NIST framework provides a great, sort of skeleton for which to operate off of, but it comes, time and time again back to human error. So if you have this great technology, you still have to have the policies and procedures, you still have to have the training, and you still have to have repeated repetitive, training, because otherwise, it's human error that is the biggest cause of the issue.
Absolutely, starts and ends with the human. I mean, in relation to just maybe a little follow on that. I mean, one of the most complex quagmires, I suppose, that we deal with in the cyber landscape is the whole legal aspect of it, is the regulations and so on, and how different they are around the world. Could you share some of your thoughts in relation to the challenges and the approaches people can take, for example, for maybe a transatlantic cybersecurity approach for businesses that are operating in North America and Europe, and how to balance those different views of privacy, those different views in relation to regulations and so on?
Well, I'm based in New York, and I think the view on the coasts is, and so then that I think, pretty much is a good view. I mean, most of our clients are, in fact, following GDPR, because it is probably going to be the wave of the future. I mean, if you look at, GDPR put a data breach, sort of reporting mechanism into their rules, and the U.S., while we had, data breach procedures, we really didn't have a proactive stance. And now you can see, I mean, literally probably every week to, I don't know, 17, 18 days on average, one of the states is proposing legislation to have some sort of a proactive, safe harbor sort of a process in place. So I think that they're moving together, but I think in general, it's going to move more and more towards the GDPR template. So that's what all of our clients are, in fact, aspiring to and looking to comply to. The US is still a checkerboard. We just don't have, or at least the thinking now is that there is not enough cohesion to be able to pass a federal statute, but the states are taking active roles in being more proactive. So it's not just about, once it happens, here's what you do. It's more about preventing that from happening. So.
Fantastic. It's really interesting that, that GDPR has been seen as a sort of taken from a global approach, and we're seeing that ourselves around the world, and it's a great accolade to the work that was put into GDPR. Rob, if I can chat to you a little bit about technology itself. I mean, again, alluding to the times we're in, the elephant in the room being COVID and so on, and people working from home. Could you talk to me a little bit about the importance of digital identities?
Well, I think what COVID has done has placed a major transformation effort on businesses generally, and turned what used to be face-to-face relationships into purely digital ones. And now we're faced with the challenges of how do you onboard a customer who you may never have met? How do you prove that they really are who they say they are? And this touches, so many areas. The legal issues around how you capture that information and how you process it, where you send it. If you're a US company with your assets in the cloud in the United States, for example, and you're onboarding European citizens, is that information processed in Europe or does it get sent to America? These are, legal issues that you're going to have to deal with. I mean, if I talk about what we do and some of the challenges that we experience on a daily basis, we're a small SME based in Ireland. We have a cloud-first posture simply because we don't have the resources internally to be able to take anything other than a cloud position. We rely on Amazon and Microsoft, others, to do all the sort of technical heavy lifting that we just don't have the internal capability to do. And, when Jeanette was speaking in the last panel, she said it's cloud plus a whole variety of different supporting technologies that I think, we're going to see over the next period of time in order to help organizations enhance their security postures. And I think that's exactly right. It's security with privacy, with, the ability to identify reliably who people and who companies are in order to protect yourself from fraud, from criminality of any kind, whether that is, somebody trying to steal your money or your intellectual property in some way. All of it is going to come through a digital channel, I think, and knowing who all the actors are in your ecosystem is going to be critically important. Internal actors as well as external actors. And I think, Jacky probably comes across this fairly regularly, that the greatest risks to an organization sometimes appear within the organization rather than externally. So knowing who everybody is critically important, I think.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And if I revert back to you, Jacky, on that point, you talked about people knowing their businesses and the assets that they're trying to protect and the business goals they're trying to achieve and so on. Do you find that organizations understand their own business value chain? Do they understand their supply chain? Do they actually understand what are the key components? Do they confuse cyber resilience with business continuity and disaster recovery? Or what's your feel for when you're dealing with organizations from that take from the leadership level? Do they actually understand what cyber resilience is?
Some organizations do. I think sadly there's nothing like a good breach to focus the mind on what is the difference between cybersecurity and business resilience. And I think that a lot of organizations know they have to put kind of business continuity in place. They will do reviews and they will think about how they're going to address that. But when it comes down to it, when their plans get tested for real for the first time, there are always going to be learnings that people have to filter in there. Like at the moment, there's so much going on kind of in the supply chain at the moment, like with SolarWinds, with the Microsoft Exchange kind of issue that we've had kind of going around at the moment. A lot of people are looking at, well, actually, we sort of have to presume that we're breached, we're compromised, that our supply chain is probably breached and compromised. And, you don't see anybody throwing stones at the organizations who've had these issues recently, whether it's a 0 day or whether they had actually been infiltrated, because everybody is thinking, well, that, who's going to be next? Like, this just has to be a presumption. And it ties back in with what Jeanette was saying about having that zero trust mentality, that it's no longer good enough to have a perimeter around your network and saying we will put up the walls and defend in that way. We now have to take a view that the threat is inside and that we are, continually monitoring and watching for what's in there. So in answer to your question, do people really understand their supply chain and the resiliency risks that they have? I think no. I think people do know that it's a problem, but have they got to the bitter end of it? No. Do a lot of people get shocked when they actually have a cybersecurity incident with the lengths that they have to go to recover from it and try and remove whatever compromise they believe they have? I think it's quite a shocking experience for people, actually. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, thanks, Jacky. And Diane, to follow on from that, I mean, I would imagine in New York and the client base is probably, dare I say, a little bit more litigious than what we find in, for example, Dublin or parts of Europe. Is that a motivator for people to take cybersecurity seriously? Because what we're seeing here is large scale breaches that are in the news for a day, and then they're gone. 500,000 records being breached. They get notified law enforcement, but nothing really happens. There doesn't seem to be any civil action. Things take years to happen for there to be any impact financially or from a quality perspective to that organization. Is it different in the United States?
No, I mean, it's the same. It's the same thing. I think I can't say this enough. Jeanette said it, and Jacky has echoed it. Coin the word people systems. It is all about the people in the, they're the greatest threat to the data systems, I think. And I think Jacky is right. Not only do, generally corporations not really think about continuity, resilience, that they just really are not thinking about this in the way it needs to be thought about, which is why it keeps happening to a certain extent. Litigation, I think that's clearly you'd like to avoid that, but I think it is more, it is more a fight with the insurance industry, which is increasingly being forced to make what is perceived as forced capital investments into companies when this type of activity occurs, and the policies were not necessarily intended to cover that. And so there are a number of cases throughout the country now that we are watching and monitoring where the insurance companies are really pushing back on cyber coverage claims. And so we'll see where that ends up. But so far, they've been pretty effective at not covering claims unless specifically you had an assessment in place, you took reasonable precautions, you acted reasonably, and reasonably the bar is continuing to get higher. So again, to echo Jeanette's earlier comment, you have to assume that it's there and that you are constantly looking for it inside, which is why the people and the training need to be a bigger, more focal part of any kind of a management program.
Fantastic advice, because I mean that obviously adds on to this huge challenge we have in the cybersecurity industry of getting skilled people. There's over 4 million open cybersecurity positions around the world. What advice do you have? And I'll start with you, Rob, and maybe we all three could input on this. What advice do you have in relation to how to get those skilled people on your team, whether they're working operationally with you or working with clients, to affect that culture and policy? Because when we think of it, we're allowing employees in to work on data, whether they're in a bank, insurance company, and do they really understand what they're dealing with? And the value of the data they're working with. How do we deal with that challenge of the cultural aspect, the realization of the importance of the work they're doing and the impact it has on people's lives if they get it wrong? Can I start with you, Rob, maybe as an SME, and that challenge to try and recruit skilled people with the right moral and ethics to work in this kind of environment?
Well, the point you make about supply and demand is most definitely there, and because the demand is so high, the cost to try and recruit skilled security people is incredibly high. For us, most of it is out of our reach. We can't afford to hire super duper best of the best security people. So we rely on organizations, as I said, who have the capability to do it. Now, we look at cybersecurity internally almost as a state of mind. We talk to all our staff regularly so that it is something that they think about and are tasked with being aware of all of the things that they do. The things that are within their control, their own laptop, the things that they open and close in terms of applications, attachments, all of the things that potentially are going to cause us a problem. Equally, other things that are particularly sensitive for us, anything that touches client data, any special categories of data, things like biometric information that under GDPR, is treated differently than, just a regular name and phone number, for example. So all our staff are regularly reminded of what those things are. So it's front and center all the time. And I think, again, the theme of today, some of the earlier speakers, has been about understanding where your risks are and sort of focusing your efforts on maintaining a posture that minimizes damage that could be caused by an exposure to any one of those areas. And that's the way we take it. I mean, we know we're not perfect, but we also know that we can't afford to be perfect. So we're sort of balancing our risk all the time, readjusting as we need to. And I think that's what most SMEs have to do. Get it to be a state of mind, constantly thinking about it, and adjust as necessary.
Thanks, Rob. Great points. And Jacky, if I can throw a little bit extra onto that question for yourself in relation to diversity and women in cybersecurity, how do we deal with this human challenge of education and getting the right kinds of people into the cybersecurity industry to help with this issue, which is a human issue? It has to come from leadership, obviously, the whole way down through the organization. It's not just about technology if we're going to deal with it holistically. What key points or advice would you have around that?
Well, I think you do really need to look at the qualities of the type of people that you want to attract into cybersecurity. So, the people who are attacking us are smart. There's no doubt about it. They have kind of nation state sponsorship behind a lot of them, and then we also have people who are just playing with systems like script kiddies and things. So if who they've got all day and all night to try and get into your systems and use what's at their disposal to do it, and it's easy to get tools to go hacking, and so we have to presume that the people who are trying to attack us are smart. So therefore, we want smart, kind of inquisitive, people who enjoy working with puzzles. Like, you want a certain type of person who's working in the technology side of cybersecurity, but you also need to balance that with the risk aspect. And, you want people who are interested in risk, who understand it, who can understand the business risk as opposed to just the technological risk that you're dealing with, and blend all that in together. And it's definitely not a 9-to-5 job working in cybersecurity. If you want to get into the heart of it, typically you will find that you may have to be available in the evenings and work through a breach with an organization or within your own organization. So you need to be quite interested and quite dedicated to do that. There's kind of that civil service, as in that I want to serve society aspect of a lot of people who work in cybersecurity. And I suppose in relation to the kind of gender piece in cybersecurity, for me, it doesn't matter whether you're man, woman, or child. Like, if you want to work in cybersecurity and you've got the skills, that's great. I think we have a shortage of women in cybersecurity, so we're leaving a lot of untapped talent that we probably need to protect our countries, our organizations, etc. Not in the industry. So we need to work harder at making sure that we have the best talent, be they male or female, in cybersecurity. And it's great to see so many of the speakers today actually are women. I think it is something that is beginning to change, and that's great to see. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Jacky. And then maybe and I think this may be our last question. I think they want to go to a Q&A after this. But Diane, on that question, Jacky's talked there about having people that are interested in puzzles and may have that kind of propensity and maybe even be motivated by almost patriotism in how they want to work and protect their country and the businesses they work for. And that's obviously where a lot of the cyber talent comes from the United States. But I'm very intrigued by your own background, where you're a lawyer, but yet you've gone off and got these cybersecurity qualifications. Don't we need lots more cyber lawyers? Don't we need lots of cyber marketing people? Don't we need lots of other cyber type roles within organizations that are complementary to their core activity but have a cyber element to them?
Oh yes, I definitely think so, and I think we're moving in that direction. I mean, the economy, life, social mores. I mean, everything is going more digital. And I think that it will just be, I mean, you sort of move out of the industrial era into more of a digital era. And I think we're in the growing pains now of that transition, both, socially, politically, economically. So, yeah, I think it'll only continue to grow. A lot of the jobs that get displaced now will be replaced on the digital side.
Absolutely. And would you think you talked about kind of insurance costs, Diane, baseline of expectations required from insurance companies? Do you think things like board members being qualified on cybersecurity, business leaders from the very top being qualified around cybersecurity in the absence of a CISO, for example, do you think that's the kind of thing that insurance companies are looking for as a baseline requirement?
Not yet, but we are advocating that they get there. The SEC is there, the Chamber of Commerce is there. Board members in general, grew up in an industrial age because they're older, and you really need someone on the board, or at least a couple of people on the board, who really understand how businesses function today, because it really is about the technology. Most companies are data companies now, and so yeah, having people on the board as opposed to just someone to come in to give a 10-minute presentation and they leave, and they only come in a couple times during the year to update at a very high level is just not sufficient. And that's why we continue to see the problems that we see.
Fantastic. Well, look, it just leaves me to say thank you so much to Diane, Jacky, and Rob for your time today. It's been a very interesting session, and I think I'll hand over now to Connor, who has a Q&A. So thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. There's just a couple of questions that come in from the audience. Jacky, if I could pick up a point with you first, and you were talking about how to identify for the business the cost of investment into cybersecurity. And, it was seen as an overhead, but it's actually not an overhead. It's a requirement. It's almost, as you said, in the business transformation line, it belongs. If I asked you in terms of cybersecurity investment from businesses into their businesses, where is it at right now versus where it should be, do you think?
That's a really interesting question. And we often, when we're working with organizations to see what level of maturity they're at, one of the questions that we would ask them is what percentage of their technology spend, because that's typically budget under the CTO, would they spend on cybersecurity? And, anything under 10%, and you've probably got some challenges. But we normally do a survey every year, and it's interesting. We speak to I think it's 4,000 different organizations kind of globally. And somebody just pinged me yesterday to say it's looking as if people have actually really upped their spend on cybersecurity comparatively this year. And whether that's an impact of what's happened with COVID or why, I don't know yet. So we'll have to do some further analysis into that as we go through that data. But to me, I think that there's a balance. When you look at something, you have a cost of doing business, you have, a value of your assets, and you need to protect all that proportionately. And if you look at something financially, the kind of controls that you can put in place for it, you need to say, well, is it worth it? What's the alternative if I got breached and I got a regulatory fine, or what's my reputation worth? So you need to look at the value of the assets and how much you're prepared to spend in order to protect those. And it's very interesting when you spill that into things like ransomware. We're seeing with ransomware today that the attackers are actually doing a lot of research on an organization beforehand, and often breaking in and looking to see whether they've got cyber insurance, what's the policy worth, how much is this organization going to be prepared to pay? And they'll hit you with exactly that amount, whether it's 1 million or 10 million. So they're very good at making an evaluation of how much you value your cybersecurity and how much they think you'll pay. So we should equally be able to work out how much we should spend and then work out how we're going to spend it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jacky. The second question, Rob, if I may address it to you, talks, and you mentioned internal and external actors. And we heard in the first segment, the notion of bad actors. And you talked about identifying them. Maybe from an SME perspective, how do I go about, or how does one go about identifying those bad internal, external actors? And then the second part is, how does one go about preparing to protect against that?
Well, the first thing is knowing who everybody is within within your system, I need to know who you are reliably, whether that is an employee or an external contractor. I need to know who you are. Making sure, for example, that credentials aren't reused, that everybody has their own ID. Is a really big thing. Where I issue a credential to somebody just for argument's sake in a hospital, and they leave it on the desk. Somebody comes along and picks it up and logs in as that person. Well, the system will think that it is the first person, not the second person. So making sure that you've got controls around how identity and credentials are used both internally and externally is extremely important. Your revocation policy, when somebody leaves the organization, make sure that you remove them from your system. Onboarding, everybody pays a lot of attention to, but they don't pay much attention to offboarding, or enough attention to offboarding. Make sure that you don't have old, stale information lying around. Get rid of it as quickly as you can, or archive it. And keeping credentials fresh, forcing refreshes. Everybody has seen over the last while, strong customer authentication starting to appear for transactions over 30 euros, 50 euros as you buy things. Well, the same should exist when it comes to accessing, data assets, computer assets of different kinds. Force that diligence to make sure that you know who is touching what when. And if you do that, reasonably well, you will be able to protect most things pretty well. That would be where I'd sort of place the most general emphasis. Obviously there are sort of end of the spectrum things that you could do where you've got ultra sensitive or security related things that you need to give special attention to. But for the vast majority of SMEs out there, do the basic things really well, and you will protect really well, I would say.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rob. Can I just say thank you to our panel, to Paul for moderating superbly. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate your time. And to Diane, Rob and Jacky for your insights. Very much appreciated. And thank you for coming in to talk to us this afternoon.